would you rather somebody held back on the truth, or rather told you the truth so that you could deal with it and grow and learn?
So you're saying giving feedback is kind of a truth-telling process.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be. And it has to be given with positive intent.
So welcome, I'm Stewart Desson from Lumina Learning, and we're here for the Out of Office podcast. And today I'm joined by two esteemed colleagues. One is Jonathan Cannon, my research extraordinaire partner, who's going to share the dialogue today around culture, feedback, and how to give it. And Tania Hummel, who is I can say ex-HR director from the corporate world turned facilitator consultant extraordinaire, working in different sectors from charity to commercial to organizational across the globe. So welcome to my colleagues, and let's kick things off. So Tania, I'm curious to know for you, like the idea of a culture being good at giving feedback, is that something you've experienced?
I've experienced a variety of cultures, and no two cultures are really the same. A lot depends on the leadership at the top. So, in the private sector, generally speaking, the whoever owns the business sets the tone, sets the culture on how much they're willing to give and receive feedback. For Sometimes, actually, the public sector can be really good at this because they do an awful lot of training. There's lots of reporting obligations on how they're doing in various areas. And so they kind of take a more sort of academic approach to culture and do a lot of training on giving and receiving feedback. Other cultures altogether avoid any talk of feedback because it's far too difficult and far too dangerous.
It's almost like a dirty word, feedback. Sometimes it's like,
Well,
I've got some feedback for you, Jonathan. Yeah.
yeah,
it's
because
scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
I
massive.
think to some extent it depends on your puppyhood.
Yeah.
So when people are young, if they grew up in a family or in a culture where feedback was really criticism, when you start to talk about giving and receiving feedback, they just hear criticism. They don't actually, because for some people, feedback isn't about positive feedback. It's really about telling you what you're doing wrong.
Yes.
So that can lead, and I've seen it myself, when you're introducing a new appraisal system, everybody dreads it. When I first got into HR at appraisal time, you'd have mascara stained faces going and faxing the CV because they were given some negative feedback.
Yes.
So I think giving and receiving feedback is more art than science, and some people are really good at it.
I mean, it's actually, you can be diagnosed with a clinical condition that says you can't receive feedback. It is
Exactly.
possible to go to that extreme as well,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
But what I hear you saying is it depends on the leader setting the tone.
Yeah.
And your experiences, public sector, actually can be good at that. And you're saying it's because it's trainable. You think we can, even if we've had an upbringing that didn't encourage feedback, you think we can train ourselves, do some personal development. Tell me about that. How can I do that?
How can you do that? I think, sadly, in some cases, it depends on how self-aware the leader themselves is. So I once went for a job interview at a major publisher, very successful, very illustrious leader. And he said to me, "Well, Tania, half of me thinks that HR is a very good idea, and half of me is filled with horror." And
At the idea of HR.
yeah. And
Did you know which half you were in?
well, I think because it was very much the creative industry, and their creative industries tend to be very people focused anyway. Everything is built on relationships, and the extent to which you are successful, he said to me, depends on your ability to make friends. And I thought, gosh, that's a really interesting take, because
It
in other
is.
sectors where you've got people who've got management qualifications or they've been on the MBA, they tend to come with a lot more thoughtfulness, and they're interested in the culture, and they
Yes.
ask you about the culture. So there's always this joke, depending on which sector you're coming from. If you're coming from the creative industries, they always ask you what the culture is at interview. If you're looking at financial services, they'll always ask the package. What's the package? I'll cope with whatever the culture is. So I think to that extent, leaders As long as everything is going well, they don't care about HR, they don't care about cultures of giving and receiving feedback. When they've been through some kind of trauma or there's been a negative press article, that's when they start to get interested in, well, what's going on here? Or if maybe HR's been lucky enough to do a
So if
survey.
it's going well, they're not really going to worry. And you're saying
Exactly.
that if it's going well, their focus is on the
Yeah.
boss that you had once. It was about being friends with everybody, and that was
Yes,
more, that could, I guess, get in the way of feedback, couldn't it? Because if we want to be friends, maybe I don't want to say
exactly.
anything
Exactly.
that
And
might disrupt that.
exactly. And I think, I do a lot of training on giving and receiving feedback. So I worked for a very wonderful man, Clive Lewis, who was a mediator, and he put together a program, and it was all about giving and receiving feedback. So part of it was civility training, part of it was inclusive leadership. And the foundation to all of that was to be able to give and receive feedback, and especially having difficult conversations because, despite our killing 100 million people in the last century alone, we're very shy about conflict. And it's very easy to kind of bury stuff in the hope that it
Or
goes
maybe if we
away.
don't give feedback and we're not open, it kind of, to avoid conflict, it sort of makes it worse
Yes,
in the
exactly.
long run.
I mean, I've got
Exactly.
something I'd like to get your thoughts on and yours as well, Stuart, because my issue with a lot of training around giving feedback, receiving feedback, difficult conversations, it's very formulaic.
Yeah.
Active listening, listen to understand, not to respond,
Yeah.
provide, grounded evidence, things like that. It's step by step, these are the right things
Yeah.
to do. But then actually building the desire and the habit to actually do that in a
Mm.
natural way is something that I feel is missing a lot of the times.
I After you.
Well, I think one of the things that a phrase that someone taught me a long time ago that I use a lot is the spirit of appreciative inquiry.
Okay.
And if you're going to give somebody feedback, how would you go about it if this was someone you deeply cared about?
Mm.
Because often when we want to give feedback, it might be in a moment of anger, where it's like, oh, you did this really stupid
I
thing.
need to address this
I
right
need
now.
to address this kind of thing right now when you're angry. And there's no preparedness.
Mm.
The facts haven't been established. That is hugely important. And so people can kind of dive in feet first, get it very badly wrong, have the opposite effect of what they intended, and then kind of go away to lick their wounds and thinking, well, I've now damaged the relationship. How do I rebuild from that?
Mm.
So I think the art of giving and receiving feedback really has to start with that level of appreciative inquiry.
Actually caring about it leaves you with the
Absolutely
person.
caring about something. And the thing is, when we work in organizations, we sometimes are put together with people that we've got nothing in common with.
Mm.
We don't really care about them. We just have to work together. But I think part of that mindset of, if this was my son, or if this was my brother, or if this was my good friend, how would I approach them to
Mm.
give them this message? And we're talking about constructive feedback as opposed to, praiseworthy feedback.
Yeah.
And actually, some people are brilliant at criticizing everything and
Mm.
praising nothing. And other people are brilliant at praising everything to the extent that the person is deeply shocked and traumatized the first time they ever get negative feedback.
Mm.
A curious thing I've noticed, that the people that say they're good at giving feedback, yeah, and I want feedback and I give feedback, there's a really low correlation between saying that and actually being good at it. It's a bit like driving. We all think we're above average drivers,
Yeah.
but we sort of can't be. And it sort of speaks to your point, Jonathan, as well, that it seems to be trainable. On paper, it's incredibly easy to
Yes,
be trained in how to give
yes,
Yeah.
and receive feedback.
6 steps, do all of them,
Bang.
you'll be
exactly.
You
good.
could do it in half an hour, but in reality, it's a form of personal development,
Hmm.
and it requires reflection, knowing yourself, and being open, and that's kind of a bigger deal. So
Hmm.
actually, to get good at it might even take a decade's worth of development,
Mm.
dependent on how you've, as you say, how you've been brought up, whether that's part of the what you were used to
Hmm.
in your earlier years. Kind of, yeah, interesting.
I did a training session for a group of recruiters, and there was one chap who was very handsome and very charming, but he was also utterly self deprecating.
Right.
And so when I had my one to one coaching session with him, I was very curious about his self talk. And I said, tell you what, can you write a list of things that you tell yourself about yourself? And he started writing. And he didn't stop writing. And I was like, wow, that's a mighty, mighty long list.
Yeah.
And then I said to him, okay, now you've looked at that list. You don't have to share that with me. This is what you say about yourself. And I said, would you say those things to your 5-year-old self? And he sort of shrugged it off. And I said, would you say those things to your 5-year-old son? Because I knew he had a 5-year-old son. Oh, did I get a reaction? He said,
Mm.
I'd never say those things to my 5-year-old son. So I said, so why do you say those things to yourself? And part of that coaching was to get him out of that frame of mind where he would beat himself up on a daily
Sure.
basis. And this is one of the challenges of giving
I
feedback.
think so.
You never know if the person that you're giving feedback to has really got very low self-esteem, and any constructive criticism in your mind might be incredibly wounding to them.
Well, let's disclose my self-esteem now. So, I mean, I think the inner dialogue, the inner talk, the mind talk
Mm.
is one of the biggest reasons why we either don't give feedback or don't like it when we get
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
So I like to think, like most drivers, I'm much better than average
Mhm.
at giving and receiving feedback, but I'm willing to admit that might not be true. So for me, I mean, my inner dialogue, normally I'm pretty open. I mean, what do you think? Am I open? Do I ask for feedback?
I think for the most part,
Mhm.
you are. I think there are times, and this is an issue that I face as well, there can be a level of defensiveness
Yes.
about it, especially, for me personally, if it's something that I truly think I'm an expert in, or
Yeah.
that I know what I'm talking about, and I get feedback to the contrary from someone I don't think knows as much, I can
Yeah.
get hugely,
So for you, it's a
defensive.
belief around your expertise.
Yeah.
And if
It's
that's-
almost a challenge.
if it's your
sometimes.
domain
Yeah, yeah,
expertise,
yeah.
you don't want to be challenged.
Yeah, even though sometimes I recognize if 2 hours later, I sit back and reflect and actually think,
Yeah.
yeah, fair
Yes.
enough, maybe it's all right. But in the moment, it's almost like a personal attack, and it's almost like I have to defend myself.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because FIRO theory is about people's needs.
Yes.
And some people have a very high need for significance,
Mm.
which means they want to feel included.
Yes.
They get very upset if they're not included. For others, it's about their capability. And so if you challenge, so for somebody with very high inclusion needs, if you isolate them or you don't involve them on something, that's when they're going to get very upset. Somebody with very high capability needs, if you challenge their competence, oh, that's when you get them. And
Mm.
for other people, they just want to be liked or loved. And if you say something that dents that a bit, so it's slightly different for different
Yeah, I mean, as you
people,
say
what will
that,
be
I
the
can
trigger.
see you being higher on the competence
Yeah,
need there. Maybe I'm higher on the inclusion.
I think you're on the inclusion or the wanting
Yeah,
to be liked one,
interesting.
because I think you're more than okay being challenged on competence or knowledge or expertise or whatever.
Yes,
I'm not so
I
much.
do want to be liked. The interesting inner dialogue for me comes if I'm given feedback and it's around, the content. I'm robust, great. If something triggers me to think I'm stupid,
Mm.
or even worse, that I'm about to fail,
Yeah.
I'm kind of aware. It can trigger me to go back to the 10-year-old version of Stewart. So
Uh-huh.
you talked about your upbringing, so
Yeah.
on. So my dad, he could be quite critical when it came to school studies, passing exams, and so on. So I kind of had a fear of, if something implies I'm going to fail,
Mm.
that can close me down
Yeah.
to feedback. Of course, I do know about it, so I try not to repeat the same thing
Yes.
from all those years ago. But this is why I say I think it's about personal development. If we don't look at where some of our beliefs come from, we will probably be closed at some level to the feedback.
Mm.
My belief is we've all got stuff that's happened in the past, and we've all got things that if we get triggered on,
Yes.
will close us down to the feedback.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I think we always have to peel back a few layers
Yeah.
and go a little deeper. And I was intrigued by what you said at the beginning, Tania, which is that the openness of the leader that sets the tone for the organization, how they go about either giving or receiving feedback or not. I think that role modeling is incredibly powerful, either positively or unfortunately negatively, in creating the culture.
Well, I've worked for some fantastic CEOs who've been I think humor is a huge part of it, not taking oneself too seriously,
Mm.
being able to admit flaws, being able to admit mistakes, kind of where people are very terrified in a hierarchy, where you've got somebody who kind of goes, you made a mistake. What did you learn? Let's move on. That is a wonderful thing. As a consultant, though, it's very different. As a consultant, it's very different.
You can get killed.
I
Yeah.
come across some really terrible CEOs. I mean, one particular guy, s- well, he was not a terrible CEO, but his manner was left a lot to be desired. So I was doing a leadership
Very
program.
diplomatically put.
I was doing a leadership program. He turned up and he basically gave this opening speech. And his opening speech is, I know that you guys think this is all a pile of crap, but listen, you might learn something. And then to my horror, he came back later and he behaved as a participant and he started interfering in everybody else's work.
Lovely.
And then he'd pick up what they'd done and he'd said, do you know how much money I'm paying for this and you're doing this?
Mm.
I was like, wow, gosh. So I've been very lucky to work for fantastic CEOs,
Yeah.
but some of the ones that I come across, I'm thinking it's not them that need the leadership development, it's you.
Yes.
Well, isn't that the case 9 times out of 10? I mean, I've been involved in a lot of organizations where the leader says we need a team build
Mm,
and we need to do this and that, and
yeah.
other people need to be better at giving and receiving feedback. And
Yes.
actually, it normally starts with the leader.
Well, I did a workshop with the CEO participating, which is always a kind of a double-edged sword, and where everybody was comparing their overextensions, she very proudly announced that she had none
Yeah,
ever.
fair
So
enough.
so it's like, well, that's wonderful. Aren't you the perfect person?
She said she never did, or it just didn't appear in her.
She didn't have any
Bullshit.
overextensions. And when
Right.
I queried this and said, oh, never, she said never. And everybody was sort of,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Exactly, because everybody, her overextensions were very apparent to everybody in the team. But the very fact that she could announce to everyone that she had none
Mm.
just completely shut down the
I
conversation.
mean, the
with
biggest
everyone
challenge
else.
with a self-report psychometrics like Lumina Spark with the colleague you're talking about there is the ability to delude ourselves.
Yes.
Because part of the human condition is that we'll all overextend from time to time.
I mean, how do you say to someone like that? That's 20 people in your team, they all see that you've got certain issues to work on,
Well,
but they don't see it in themselves.
Well, this was interesting. This was just part of a continuation of a program that I'd started. So there was no value in going there. The value in going there was, for example, when Clive would go in to mediate, and he mediated all over the NHS. And as a result of his mediation, I would get the coaching.
Right.
And that's where everything was picked up on and challenged. So, for example, there was this hospital up somewhere north, I can't remember where it was. And essentially, what had happened was there'd been an increase in infant mortality. And so the obstetricians took charge. All women, belts and braces, didn't matter if they needed it or not. We were going to get those stats down. Midwives, totally alienated, totally unhappy. And then it became a bit of the Cartman triangle. So the midwives went very much into the victim mode and saw the obstetricians as the
They were
persecutors.
persecuting.
And then, the mediators, we're supposed to be the rescuers and we're not going to do that. And so the mediation was very tough. And like he said, in the morning, everybody's shouting and crying. And in the afternoon, we now have to sit down and figure out what it is that we're going to do about it. And part of that was giving the feedback to individuals in the room. And the person that I had to coach was described as the elephant in the room.
They were the elephant in the
They
room.
were the elephant in the room. But actually, we managed to get the elephant in the room into a position of being the clinical lead eventually through the self-awareness, because what was interesting was all of the behaviors that she brought to this job had been very successful for her in her previous role.
Oh.
In this context, in this environment, it was completely different.
Right.
And from the Lumina portrait, you could see that a lot of those green behaviors that were about empathy and adapting and connecting, she saw as unprofessional.
Yes.
And so when we went through this coaching program and she started using those behaviors, that's when she became the bridge between the midwives
Yes.
and the
So is that,
obstetricians.
so she had she come from a different industry or
She'd
different
come from a
trust or
different hospital,
right,
different trust, different culture, different
different
everything.
needs?
And you come in, you do what you've always done,
Yes.
thinking you're going to get
Yeah.
what you always got, and then you find you're not in
You
Kansas City.
don't.
So was it just a case of bringing that awareness to
Very
them?
much so.
Okay.
Very much so. I mean, I would say things like to her, it's like, well, when you're at home, how do you behave?
Yeah.
And the way she behaved at home was completely different to the way she behaved at work. And it's like, what would happen if you asked the midwives a question? What would happen if you made a joke? What would happen if you
Trying to connect with them
involved and
personally.
included them in some of the decisions that you're making?
Yeah.
Because with the obstetricians trying to get the infant mortality rates up, improved,
Mm.
it was belts and braces for everybody. And the women was stopped going to that hospital. It got a very bad reputation that it was too draconian and they were choosing to go elsewhere. So, I mean, I think sometimes those truth-telling sessions can be extremely painful, but they also clear the air. And the only time it happens with me with that kind of leadership is if something has gone badly wrong. Something has gone badly wrong. A really senior person has left in a huff. There's a big tribunal or a big court case coming, and they're like, we need to make sure this never happens again.
So in that case, then the difference between the previous hospital and this one, was it the people? Was it the
Yes.
type of patients they were working with, or the issues they were facing?
Yeah, just totally different because, people behave differently depending on the circumstance and the context.
Yeah.
All of us can be our best selves when the environment supports that.
Mm.
But when we're in an environment where perhaps, there's change, there's transformation, or there's huge uncertainty, people respond to uncertainty in very different ways.
Mm.
And so sometimes that brings forth the overextensions. And you can overextend, as you know, in many different ways.
I'm kind of curious about how we can think we've figured things out in our career and how to do stuff in the one best way.
Yeah.
And then, as you say, we go to a new role or, there's a new relationship, a new boss, and it kind of changes everything. And that's where I think our personal development and our reflection comes in. And really feedback is a tool, a catalyst for that, that allows us to re-engineer how we want to be in a new context. Because you are right, if we just do what made us successful in the past, it's highly likely, unless you stay really in the same role your entire career, which we kind of don't do anymore, you will derail. It will cause a problem, or you'll trigger somebody else, and you'll be surprised by what happens. And even though I kind of know this, I'm still surprised when it happens every time. I want to ask you about one of the times you said yes, because I recall you telling me that you work with the United Nations that's taking you to the Middle East, where there sounded like there were some really interesting and tricky conflicts and discussions around, say, human rights.
Yes.
In maybe certain cultures that value it less, or some people in it would value it less. Just tell me, how does giving feedback play out in the United Nations in that sort of situation?
Well, I work as a senior advisor on leadership to UNITAR. So I was introduced to UNITAR by some very illustrious professors, all of which were called Michael.
Okay.
And they appointed me as part of this group. We've set up it was supposed to be the Institute of Responsible Leadership, but now it's called International Responsible Leadership. So it's this group of us that go from project to project, and I'm involved in all of that. So a bit of a plug for them and Professor Mike Sachs.
Okay, Professor Mike Sachs.
Yes, and so I was introduced to Alex Mayer at UNITAR, and essentially I only went to do a half-day workshop in Geneva as part of they do these rolling collaborative leadership programs. So I went off and I did a half-day Lumina session, and they loved it. And on the back of that, I was invited to the Public Servants Award in Morocco by the King of Morocco. I've got the invitation.
I think I've seen that on your
good.
LinkedIn, a picture of you with the King of Morocco.
Lots of camels.
Yeah.
Lots of camels, lots of excitement. But UNITAR is an incredible organization. organization. Basically, it's the training and research arm of the UN. So a lot of the statistics, a lot of the development that you see that's coming out of the United Nations comes from UNITAR. They do amazing work on a very small budget. But essentially, my role with that is all about the collaborative leadership. So at first, I was going backwards and forwards to Geneva about collaborative leadership. And there in the audience would be these government officials and diplomats from every country in the world. One of the workshops we did had, I think, something like 50 people from every country in the world, and they're all with their
Yeah.
translators listening into what you're saying. But it's really interesting to see the response, because for some of those people in some of those countries, some of them come from very authoritarian countries
Yes.
where giving and receiving feedback is a
Not the
dangerous
done
thing to
thing.
do, very dangerous thing to do. But at the same time, what I was told, and why they love the Lumina model so much, is I was told that the best diplomats are able to go right across the wheel and
Yes.
adapt to whatever it is that they find. They can be very discipline driven. They can be very open to experience. They can be very empathetic. They read the room and they know what's required. So at first it was all about collaborative leadership. And let's face it, 193 countries, 5 of which have the veto, with 17 sustainable development goals. I mean, when you're looking at it in those terms, I mean, if you're a coach, you want to work on one goal, not 17,
Yeah.
and if you're wanting to arrange a family barbecue, that's hard enough. Never mind 192 countries, all speaking different languages with different cultures, with different mindsets. So the
Sure.
work it does is absolutely incredible. Following the collaborative leadership workshops, I was invited last year to Doha. And I did not realize that Doha has now become the capital of diplomacy, even
Yeah.
surpassing Geneva. So if you look at the news, there isn't a week that goes past without something happening in Doha, the diplomats all trying to resolve all of the international conflicts. And so I was invited to Doha because it was a joint association between GOPAC, which was started by the Canadians, the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, because it's the parliamentarians that help design the legislation. And so that's where you start. So that was all about human rights. So it was a partnership between GOPAC and UNITAR. And you have all of these government officials and diplomats, there to talk about human rights. And, I got some criticism, of going to the Middle East. And it was like, what are you going to the Middle East to talk about human rights for? And I was like, well, they're not going to send me to Denmark.
Yeah.
They're not
So
going to
you had
send
a
me
few people
to.
grandstanding.
Yes,
You were
very
giving
much so.
critical, unhealthy
Very
feedback.
much so. But
Yeah.
I also had a lot more delight, actually,
Yes.
because it's almost biblical. Like the son that is the prodigal son who returns and you help is often the one that you favor instead of the one that's been the good boy all the time. And I think the world is changing very fast. The geopolitics are changing very fast. And I think the Middle East is very aware to the fact that the oil is running out and that they need to diversify and they need to have more diversified economies, and they want to have more influence. And they can't do that as long as their reputations for human rights, go before them. So
So your take on it is you want to help improve human rights, and you need to work with the people that want to improve it, wherever that may be.
well, there's this initiative this year, because last year it was in Doha, this year it was in Riyadh. And it was a fascinating project because the king of Morocco, the king of Saudi, decided that he wanted expertise in human rights. So he approached UNITAR and the Human Rights Commission in Riyadh and one of the universities, and he said, set up a 6-month program. So participants from the public and the private sector were invited and to participate, and a 6-month program was put together. So my part of it, I went over for 4 or 5 days. The first part of it was all about the Lumina Spark model, influencing, persuading, all of that. The last part of it was the train the trainer part, where these individuals were going to go back into their own organizations and set up projects funded by the king to further the cause of human rights. And as you know, a lot of those participants were from, educated in Britain and America. And to some extent, I was surprised because I was preaching to the converted. There were a
Uh-huh.
lot of feminists in the audience.
Amazing.
There was an HR chap from Aramco who was very passionate about inclusion, and we had a really robust conversation. And the last couple of days was all about how you influence and persuade, because there would be a lot of pushback. You don't change cultures overnight, but in raising people's awareness, the human rights lawyers did their thing. And to my surprise, they didn't hold back on anything. They covered all aspects of human rights. And like I say, it was very well received, and everybody got their certificates, and there was a really good mixture of people. And, from my concern about how's the card game going to go, are the men and the women going to be able to participate equally, or is it going to be awkward? No, everybody was fabulous. And as a result of that workshop, I know when I'm doing well, where they start asking me about trauma. They ask me about genetics and epigenetics and child rearing and all of these things. And I'm thinking, gosh, you really are embracing what I'm sharing with you. And so, it's to that extent, it's disconcerting, because you kind of go, this culture is so different to ours. And, you have to be careful about what you wear and how you behave. But at the same time, it's
So I'm
cultural
curious, is there
exchange.
any relationship between your intention to help support human rights, wherever that might be, and the idea that we need to give and receive feedback and be open? Is there a link between those two things?
Yeah, absolutely. Because so you can't have human rights unless you fundamentally respect human dignity. And you can't respect human dignity unless you have some wherewithal to realize that this is a person in front of you with thoughts and feelings
Their
and
own opinions,
opinions,
yeah.
and you want to hear those, as opposed to, a lot of those kinds of autocratic regimes where any dissent is suppressed, and, there's very, very strict rules.
So
Um,
it's like before you give feedback, you're saying you have to be interested in the other person,
It's
respect
like
their
you said before
dignity.
with the appreciative inquiry. It's like speaking to the person
Absolutely.
as if you really do care about them. And
Exactly. And what I found in particular, is no matter where I go, the qualities are the same. You will find people who are very agreeable, some people who are very disagreeable. You will see the differences between the inspiration driven and the discipline driven. And you will know who you're talking to when they sidle up to you afterwards to ask you for advice on how to deal with this difficult issue, or how to deal with this difficult person. Because actually, despite the fact that we're so conflict ridden, we all fear conflict and we all want harmony. And so when you start to talk to people about these issues, they're perpetually fascinated, and most of the time they all want to do better. Every now and again you'll get somebody who's quite cynical, but even those you can kind of turn around, because to some extent it's enlightened self-interest. Endless conflict is not a valuable good thing. So, it's I think part of it is, if you create an environment of trust and people feel that you're not judging them, magic can happen. No?
And you also commented that wherever you go in the world, people have personalities, and you see some of these same aspects of
Mm,
personalities kind of shining through.
mm.
And that's one of the things you're working with
Yeah,
to build trust, whatever
yeah,
that may mean,
yeah,
I guess, to different people with
yeah.
different ways of being.
is
You
that
know,
the biggest blocker then, do you think, to giving or receiving feedback properly? Then is do you actually trust the person
yes,
giving it?
yes. I think you can't really have a feedback culture unless you've got that spirit of appreciative inquiry, unless you're demonstrating that it's enlightened self-interest to want to know how you're doing.
Can
You
you
know,
can you fake appreciative inquiry, or does it need to be genuine?
you can fake anything.
Yeah.
Humans are actors and actresses. We wouldn't have Meryl Streep if if people couldn't fake everything. I think the trick is some people are brilliant at faking.
Mm,
Most of us aren't, and then it comes across as very inauthentic,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
people then get suspicious. So, for example, if you're somebody who is, and I've come across this a lot of, many times, it's sort of like almost like the David Brent thing, where you want to flatter somebody into doing what you want them to do, but they see right through you and
Yeah.
they really dislike it.
Yeah. I
They
think it was an actor somewhere said, if authenticity, if you can fake that, you've got it made. Um,
yeah, quite
but
so.
hopefully, I'd like to think we can see through it.
Yes.
I'd like to aspire, if we're doing our personal development, to sort of shed a few
Mm,
layers of inauthenticity,
mm.
so we can really be who we are.
Well, I mean, sometimes in these workshops, I will give an example of someone who I think is demonstrating something, and then the person in the audience will say, "No, I disagree." And I could kind of go, "Oh, you disagree with me? This is terrible. I'm going to sling off and be very unhappy." But actually, if you've got that curiosity, it's like, how do you disagree with me? And then you look for common ground. It's like, I can agree with you on this aspect, but I don't agree with you on that aspect. But this is why. And and I think one of the things that's been so dispiriting over the last couple of decades, maybe, or particularly now, is this loss of civility, where people are not able to argue well with each other. It becomes
Yes.
very personal. There's trolling. You also have people like President Trump demonstrating this behavior and making it okay for
He's not the best
everyone
role model
else.
for giving and receiving feedback, is he?
No,
Rather sort of thin-skinned, you might argue.
exactly. And he's not that unusual. You will find people like him at the top of many corporations running things in that way.
Mm.
I've come across people like that. I've worked with people like that. But even those people, I think it's part of the narcissism thing. They like to be flattered. They want to be liked, even though they can be so incredibly disagreeable. And so, if you show that you're not judging them, everybody wants to be understood. And if you show that you understand where they're coming from, sometimes it makes it a bit more bearable to deal with
So
those
you've got to find
characters.
something to latch onto that you could agree with them on.
Yeah.
Quite difficult at times, but
Yeah, very difficult at times, but not impossible.
mm,
Because I think you can build trust, so you don't necessarily have to like each other,
yeah.
but you can build a degree of trust where I've had very senior executives come into my office and say, "I've got an issue. If you were my sister, what would you advise me?" And I kind of go, "Oh, that's so cute."
Yeah. So Tanya, if I'm running an organization and you're coming in to consult with me, and I say, help me, how can I have a culture that values giving and receiving feedback? What are you going to do for me?
Well, I think first of all, I'd want to find out why.
Mm-hmm.
Why now? What on earth is going on?
Better
What is all this
performance,
about?
better performance, more
Better
revenue, more
performance, more
profit.
revenue, more profit. Okay. I think to that extent, my preference always is to start with the senior team. You always have to start with the senior team, assess the level of self-awareness, get them able to give and receive feedback, because often people have risen to positions of
Do we need
power
this
and
self-awareness? I
authority.
mean, I've heard it's a bit overrated, this self-awareness.
Well, quite. I know. I mean, this will make you laugh. Two individuals that I said, well, why don't I run a profile? Let's see how you do. They decided to fill in the questionnaire together. And I was
Why
like,
not?
no, boys,
Yeah.
this is not.
As in they were rating each other like together.
They filled it in together.
Right.
How
Okay.
do we think we are
Oh, I
together?
see.
Yes,
One profile for the pair of
exactly.
them. I see.
Exactly.
How
It's
do we
like,
function together?
Okay.
Were they married?
well, no, they weren't. And the thing is, to some extent, people feel very for people who've been through university education or have done an MBA or whatever, this kind of thing is something to cheer about. They're curious, they're interested. For others, not so much. So I demonstrated this to the chairman of the board of a company, and he just looked at it and he said, "Bah, If this had been run on me 20 years ago, I'd never have been hired.
Mhm.
And I was like, yes, I can see that actually. But yeah, I mean, I think it really needs to be the organization that wants to change, wants to develop, and it needs to be role modeled, and it needs to be what is it when you've got there's a particular word of when somebody is like the sponsor. Somebody in
An
authority
advocate.
needs to be the sponsor and the
Mhm.
advocate and needs to sell the benefits of doing this.
Mhm.
And then everybody will fall in line, particularly if they have, that's one of the reasons that I use Lumina, because it's an enjoyable experience.
Mm.
It's raising self-awareness, but not in a negative sort of challenging way.
Mm. So you start with the senior team,
Yeah.
self-awareness
Mm.
there, being able to give and receive feedback,
Yeah.
and hopefully you have an advocate there that's
Yes.
able to kind of
Yes.
start to proliferate it. How do you then kind of infuse the culture with it then and make it natural rather
Well,
than
I,
kind of
I, it,
espoused?
it worked really nicely with Coca-Cola because I only went to do a half-day workshop for them in Seville. There were like 60 people and 4 mats, and I was Madonna with the microphone on the ear, and it
Yeah.
was like, oh my word, and that was great fun. But it went down so well that the leader of that team, that director, asked me to do all the teams going down, and people were really energized and curious about, oh, they did that. Because sometimes what happens is you go and you do the senior team and everyone gets curious and it's like, what are you doing? No, it's not for you. It's for
Yeah.
them. And of course, budget constraints mean
Yeah, I'm
that,
never keen on that approach. I
Yeah.
think start at the top to role model it, but it needs to be shared
Exactly.
with
Exactly.
everybody.
And then, and what I've noticed is that the effects last a long time. The effects fade over time, where people can sometimes revert to being their natural, intransigent selves. But it does have a lasting legacy, particularly for some people. I think we've said this before. You can be unaware, but once you're aware, it's very hard to be
Hard to
unaware
go
again.
back. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll always stay with you because it's kind of got this new
No, I
learning
do. I
to
often
it.
say that with Spark with people. Once you find out you have a personality, people are different,
Yeah.
that you can sort of build rapport with people who are opposite to you. There's no going back. And it sounds obvious when you kind of know it. But if I go back to when I was at school, 18, 19, 20 years old, I had no concept of the idea that we all had different personalities and different ways of being. It just wasn't a thing back then. So
Exactly.
it is.
Is it a case of like a self-centered thing where you think everyone else is like you?
I think that's, if I'm being honest, that's what I kind of thought.
Yeah.
I assumed everyone was in varying degrees like me, and if they weren't, there's probably something wrong with them.
Even though it's probably you that was something wrong with them. I mean,
me.
Yeah, exactly.
But in all seriousness, one of the gifts of working in organisation, doing this sort of work, finding out about personality, feedback, and so on, is the personal development that comes through it. So I think a lot of people do experience personal development at work.
Yeah.
And that's a gift that maybe we didn't do it 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
The workplace has changed. We want more meaning at work.
Yeah.
Therefore, we need to do more development at work. Therefore, we need to be more open to feedback in a working environment.
Yeah, and also I think when where you've got a feedback culture, feedback is not seen as a threat. Feedback is seen as something that somebody is doing to care about you, that actually they want you to do better, to be better, to feel better. When it's characterized like that, it works. When it's seen as a stick to beat you with and to
The key,
deny
you're
you
not good
your
enough.
pay rise or your bonus or whatever.
I mean, the key thing for me here, and this is a really tricky one, but it only works, what you've just described, if people can handle their resentments. This is kind of a big deal in work and in life as well.
Yes,
It's kind of
exactly.
human nature that we might get jealous or resent somebody for something. And if we let that build, it
Yes.
kind of pollutes our feedback, and then our feedback becomes
Yeah.
poking people.
Yeah.
Whereas if we've got a way of noticing how we are feeling irritated or resentful towards someone, a way of cleaning it up, then when we do give them feedback, it's more likely to land. We won't take any feedback from someone that resents us. That's a fact.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you can't really divorce giving and receiving feedback from trying to develop a coaching culture, and some people coach too much, there was
Compulsive coaching.
an organization I worked for. It was very funny because they would have feedback groups for absolutely everything. And then one day one of the staff came to me and said, you lot are paid a lot more than us. Don't you know anything?
Yeah.
It's
They
like,
didn't like being facilitated then.
but I think you can go too far the other way. So, in that sense, as a director, you have to direct. But as a manager and a director, you have to know when coaching is the right approach, because feedback within a coaching conversation is that much more constructive
Mhm.
than feedback in a directive, you've done something wrong.
So you're
kind of
not
way.
always in favour of like non-directive coaching. Is that what I hear you say? You think there is a place for being more directive in a coaching relationship?
Well, it's difficult because manager as coach is very tricky because, most of the time, if you're coaching somebody or if somebody comes to you in a personal capacity to be coached, it's about trying to help them achieve their
Sure.
goals. Whereas when an organization sends you somebody to be coached, it's usually not for their personal goals, it's for the organization's goals. We want this person to be better. We want this person to be able to
Mm.
do this, that, or the next thing. And the person may or may not agree. So that becomes slightly
Yeah.
more kind of challenging. But, there is two schools of coaching really, where one is just purely listening and there's no direction
Yes.
whatsoever, just seeing what emerges. And then there's another school that kind of goes, well, actually, no, we've got a goal to achieve here.
Yeah.
And it does need to be a bit more
And you're
structured, a bit
leaning
more
towards the
targeted.
latter, do I sense?
Totally contextual.
Okay, you
Totally
vary
contextual.
dependent on the needs.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm. But I do think that, feedback comes with a coaching style in terms of management.
In terms of exploring the issue
Yes,
and not
exactly.
assuming
Exactly.
interpretations of
Yeah.
facts or anything.
Because often you find that in newly promoted managers without any training, they can be worse at that. They're kind of like, right, and they go back into sibling behavior. I'm the big brother, you're the little sister, you do as I say.
Yeah.
It's like, well, to some extent.
So I've got an idea. I'm going to
Go
ask
on.
both of you for your top 3 tips to a leader in an organization to create a more feedback-based culture. We're going to ping pong between you here.
Okay.
I want your best 3.
Okay.
So who's going to? Tania, do you want to go first? Top one.
Top one, I think, to give the CEO feedback on their personal
start
style.
at the top.
Yeah, start at the top. Yeah,
So-
give them some feedback.
And help them be open to feedback. Great.
Yes.
Jonathan.
Well, I'm taking the approach because I'm still a work in progress here, so I'm gonna be picking the best ones that I've heard.
Tanya, we're finished.
Well, more finished maybe.
No, just old.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I mean, the best one I've heard today is what we talked about earlier about the interpretation
Mhm.
of events and facts and not
Mhm.
assuming things to be objective truths
Yes,
in a context of giving
Exactly.
feedback.
exactly.
That would be your top tip. So separate
Yeah.
out the facts
Yeah.
from interpretations and be willing to explore and hear other people's
Yeah.
I'm
interpretations.
still working on the be willing bit.
Yeah.
I can start to recognize that.
But recognize it first.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be a top. Okay, Tanya, back to you.
Don't catastrophize, because when
Okay.
people are preparing to give constructive or negative feedback, they can scare themselves out of doing it. So overcome your own fears.
So this is the feedback giver.
Yes.
Don't catastrophize.
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically get yourself into a positive state of mind and be very clear about what end goal you want to have.
So if I'm feeling anxious and catastrophizing
Yes.
before I give feedback, it's not going to land, is what you're saying.
Exactly, because what you don't want to do is to scare yourself. So because what people often do is kind of say, if I tell them this, they're going to hate me, or I might get it wrong,
Yeah.
or what happens if I'm wrong, or what if I wound them and upset them? None of that.
So you're kind of saying you need to process
Exactly.
your inner dialogue before you give feedback. So you're kind
Yes.
of clear and well intended
Exactly.
going in. So you've prepared your attitude, if you like.
You're in the zone.
Yeah. Now, I like that. I'd go for the Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response as a space.
Exactly.
And in that space, we have the ability to choose. That's our freedom. You're saying
That's right.
trying to get into that space before you give the feedback.
Get into that space before you give the feedback. Also, be very clear about your intention to have a positive outcome, because that will change the way you
Okay, so you're
approach
going
the
to be
other
clear in your
person.
space and sort of honest and clear in your intention.
Exactly.
Perfect. I'm going to ping back to Jonathan.
I like the idea of where if a culture of an organization is at quite an immature stage of giving feedback,
Mm.
at that kind of conscious incompetence phase.
Mhm.
I like what you said earlier about being allowing very regimented space for giving feedback, like your example about the airlines.
Yes.
Making it very clear when
Yes.
feedback is allowed to be given, so that there is, you're allowed to give feedback at this point,
Yes.
even if it doesn't come
So
naturally.
it doesn't have to
This
be
is what you're-
perfect. And even if the culture is a certain way, you're
Yes.
saying a process can help.
Yes.
You can legitimize it. We
While
don't
you're
need to
on
be.
route to that
Yeah.
unconscious competence.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess you mentioned it. Is it a science? Is it an art? There is a science, a process bit to it.
Mm.
The art can come later, can't it? If you keep
Yes.
practicing the process long enough.
But I think that's the point. You have to practice. You can't be
Yeah.
this person who just gives feedback once in a blue moon.
Yes.
Ideally, you should be giving feedback in the moments whenever an issue arises, not kind
Yeah.
of saving it like we used to save it for the annual appraisal.
Yes.
And then the person
Stored
would be
it
shot to smithereens.
So Tanya, back to you for your third top tip for everybody here on how to help organizations give and receive feedback better.
Gosh, I think it is a process, and I think it needs its value needs to be demonstrated to that extent. And I
Mhm.
think if you can start with the top team being relieved that some of the things that have been swept under the carpet now emerge and have been dealt with, and that we can all be friends again. I think the most important thing is that giving negative feedback doesn't have to be the end of the world. You know, it's kind of like that Fleetwood Mac song, "Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies." Would you rather somebody held back on the truth, or rather told you the truth so that you could deal with it and grow and learn?
So you're saying giving feedback is kind of a truth-telling process.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be. And it has to be given with positive intent.
Mm-hmm. Okay, positive intent around truth-telling is the
Yes.
kind of magic
Yeah,
formula.
absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Jonathan, your third top tip?
My third one will be the idea of giving yourself feedback. You know, the story you told at the beginning about the guy who was terrified of even filling in a questionnaire about
Yeah.
themselves, terrified of receiving feedback.
Mm.
That's coming from yourself. I think that as a first step to kind of examining your own delusions about yourself or your beliefs about yourself before you then
Mm-hmm.
provide feedback to other people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If you're not comfortable giving feedback on yourself.
So it's
That's
the
right.
honesty bit, but the honesty with yourself.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the willingness to examine yourself before
Mhm.
you examine someone else.
Mm.
And also, if you've made a mistake, you know, that you don't actually do like this chap does, beats himself up, you know, I am so stupid. Of course, I'll never do this. There's lots of ways that your self-talk can derail you if you're not aware of it
Yeah.
and you don't kind of put it in a
I know you're then
box.
projecting that onto.
Yes, exactly. A
whoever
lot
else
of
you're-
projection goes on.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, I've got a top tip to build on your top
Here
tip.
we go.
When you want to give yourself feedback and be truthful and honest, I find it incredibly helpful to use generative AI to do this. I
Okay.
gather feedback from
Ooh.
different people, what they've said, I explain the situation, and I kind of ask the AI, what feedback could I give to myself to improve here? And it's
Fantastic.
obviously just telling me what I've kind of told it.
It's just, yes.
Yeah, so it is really me giving myself
Yeah.
feedback,
Yeah.
but it can be incredibly powerful.
Does it water it down and it's too nice about it?
It depends. I think if you use ChatGPT, it's too diplomatic. You have to ask it to be a bit more
Bit
harsher.
meaner.
But if you use some of the other AI engines, some of them will
Really
poke
go
you
for
a
it.
little bit more. Yeah, so be playful. I guess that's the interesting thing. Find the AI tool that's got the personality that suits you in terms of giving feedback.
The
Yeah.
perfect level of agreeableness.
Yeah, if you want it to be diplomatic and nice, then stick with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
It's gentle. Yeah.
But it's gonna agree with you.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. So I want to say a big thank you to our guest today, Tania Hummel, for sharing everything about her career, her views on feedback, how to give it and how to not do it, and my colleague Jonathan Cannon for sharing some of his wisdom too. And for everyone here on the call today, so if anything stimulated your thinking, you can like, you can share, you can comment. We'd love to see what you have to say. I want to say thank you, everybody, for your time. Go and give some great feedback and be open to receiving it too. Thank you.